Monday, June 3rd, 1991. June finally begins to seem like it's actually summer in northeastern Connecticut, but it's felt like it's summer in northeastern Connecticut for about 6 or 7 weeks, actually. We could have, I planted my peas. I must have planted my peas 5 or 6 weeks ago, at least. And they really were just beginning to blossom. And Juan, the lone Rhode Island red chicken, the last chicken left of my mini farm in Woodstock, Juan nipped off the top of every pea. Every pea, Kathy, every pea. We had attributed it to woodchucks and rabbits. I told my wife yesterday morning, the woodchucks or the rabbits have gotten our peas. We're going to have to put a fence around the garden. Well, last night, Ike, number one son, and I were out planting the rest of the garden, and we turned around, and just in time to see Juan finishing off the last of the 8 broccoli plants. Nipped them down right to nothing. We knew that it was Juan because, A, Juan was standing among the broccoli plants, and B, there was little beads of water coming right up through the plant at the top of the... You could tell it was freshly nipped off because there was a little bead of water rushing up to heal whatever had happened to these broccoli plants. So Juan is now taking care of the peas and the broccoli and getting ready to go on vacation sometime in July. I'm a little worried about... little worried. I was going to get some kind of care for Juan while we were away, but I'm starting to think of other alternatives now, what with the demise of half of the garden. My guest this morning is Jennifer Berman. Jennifer, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the WINY Talk Show. We had Jennifer's other half, I won't say better half because we're not sure yet until we've had them both on the program, Scott Berman, who is a psychiatrist working at Day Kimball Hospital and in practice locally on the program some months ago, and we enjoyed having him very much. And Jennifer is with us this morning to talk about Better Speech and Hearing Month, which, true to form on the talk show, was last month, right?
Right.
Better Speech and Hearing Month was May. But we're doing it in June. So we hope to have your telephone calls this morning. Jennifer works with small children, with families of small children and middle-aged people and people who have had different kinds of health problems that have caused them difficulty with speech, with elderly people, perhaps who have had strokes and are having difficulty in speech and communications. And we invite your telephone calls. We have services in northeastern Connecticut through Day Kimball Hospital to help people with these kinds of problems. And we invite your telephone calls. The number here is 928-2721. 928-2721. If you're calling from the Plainfield area, the number is 774-5161. That is a toll-free call. That's a Danielson Exchange, and that will get you into the WINY Talk Show from Plainfield at no cost. Jennifer, you're living in North Woodstock, you tell me, where I lived for 13 years, a nice part of the world up on English Neighborhood Road. Mm-hmm. Do you know what that means, English Neighborhood Road?
No.
Where they got that?
I have no idea.
Sometimes I've heard people say Old English Neighborhood Road. They're trying to make it sound even more gentrified and classy than it already is.
Well, when we first moved up there, we were told it was Old English Neighborhood Road, and we couldn't fit it on it took forever to write it on our return address, so we just dropped the old and put English Neighborhood.
I don't think the old is right. I don't think there's anything to do with old. I think that's somebody's new creation. It's like sometimes I hear people refer to the Woodstocks, like it was the Hamptons, or something, like, because there's East Woodstock and South Woodstock and North Woodstock and Woodstock Hill, and they say the Woodstocks. We're moving up to the Woodstocks, really. But then when
people who were moving up.
That's right. But then when the assessor comes around to tell them how much their tax bill is going to be, they're less enthusiastic about living in the Woodstocks. Jennifer, you are a speech language pathologist.
Yes.
tell us what this professional category is, and how you train for this, what kind of education is required, and where you fit into the whole medical field.
Okay. I got my master's degree. All speech pathologists and audiologists, who are people who work with hearing impairments, need to have their master's degree to practice. And after your master's degree, you do a 9-month clinical fellowship that's supervised by another professional in the area that you're specializing in, either speech pathology or audiology. And then you need to take a national exam, and then you get what's called your certificate of clinical competence in the degree area that you're studying, and then you're qualified to practice essentially on your own. And you're also required to get continuing education units, continuing programs in your field, so you can continually learn. The field is changing at this point very fast, and what I learned several years ago is now almost obsolete, especially in the areas of such thing as augmentative communication disorders, or not augmentative communication disorders, but augmentative communication. Now computers are the thing. And really, I got some computer training. I was very lucky, and got some computer training. But what I got is now almost obsolete to what's now out in the field.
Well, let's stay on that for a moment. Augmentative speech. I guess we're talking about using machines and technology to help people who. Well, why don't you tell us instead of me speculating what it is? I probably won't do. Okay. I could probably give out a lot of misinformation. Hemming
That's
and
okay. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Anyway.
Yeah, tell us what kind of people generically need that kind of assistance, and what the technologies are.
Augmentative communication covers a broad range of communication devices. They're really essentially devices for people who can't speak orally or who can't sign. They can range from anything from alphabet boards that a person would point to and spell out letters, to something as expensive as a computer. We have $5,000 computers out there that communicate, essentially speak for the patient. The patient will push a button, and it will say what the patient wants.
Do the buttons are there pre-programmed whole phrases that they're putting in? Are the person pressing words or letters, or
they can pre-program entire sentences. They can pre-program just words or categories of words. It can really do anything. They also have devices that will hook up and be environmental systems for the patients. They can push a button and it will turn on the TV for them. They can push on another button and it'll turn on the lights or turn off the lights if they need it. So the field has really opened up remarkably, and a lot of people are working very closely with people who are really computer whizzes in generating these devices for patients. And since the field of computers has come along, we've really been able to do a lot more with some of our higher level patients who need more than a board that they point to or some pictures they look at, and can communicate faster with a computer.
What was the first generation of I wonder why they even say augmentative when you could just say augmented communication?
I'm not sure.
That's like
why.
the difference between getting oriented and orientated, right?
This is true. I'm not sure why they call it augmented.
I think that your professionals are just trying to cause speech difficulty for people by using longer words than what is necessary. We're very often accused of that in our profession, of using big words. People say, well, why do you call yourselves speech language pathologists as opposed to speech therapists? What's the difference? There is no difference. It's the rate of pay difference.
That's right.
Okay. So in this, what I'm going to call augmented communication, what was the first generation of hardware that helped people speak that couldn't speak on their own?
I would say one of the first things that I can recall is an instrument by Texas Instrument called a vocade, which sounded very, very difficult to understand. And if I had one here, I'd play it for you, and you probably wouldn't understand a thing it was saying. But it was, I think, 32 buttons that you could push, and it was pre-programmed at the factory. You couldn't choose what you wanted to program. And
sort of like what was that thing that our children have all had, that you pull the ring it's like some Fisher Price toy or something?
Right. A see and say.
See and say.
Speak and say.
Yeah, you point it to the chicken, and then you pull the string.
Very similar, except this was buttons that you would push.
Yeah.
And it was disappointing. It was all that was out there, but it was disappointing because now you can choose to have the computer speak in a female or a male voice, which is very nice. If you're a female speaker, you don't want your computer speaking in a male voice for you, and most of them had been speaking in male voices only. And it was the vocade was computer-generated speech. They're still used to some degree, and they're still good for some populations, but definitely we've come a long way to being able to program what we want it to say or what actually our client or our patient wants it to say.
Where I was growing up in Warwick, New York, the man that ran the landfill, we called it the dump then. See, there's another example of putting a fancier name that's not really unnecessary.
We still call it the dump.
I think the dump, even the guy that works at the dump, he doesn't care. It's the dump. It's not the landfill. Right, Marcel? The guy that ran the dump in Warwick, New York had I don't know whether he'd had his larynx removed or what, but he had some mechanism that looked about like the little plastic box that you can retrieve your calls from your answering machine. The tone thing that he held on his neck, and then he spoke, and it somehow amplified whatever rudimentary sound he was making. What was that?
He probably had a laryngectomy, probably due to cancer of the larynx. And what that was essentially an generated sound from this box that generated the sound. Instead of having his voice box to generate the sound, he used this box on his neck, and he pressed it against his neck, and it made a sound that went into his throat. And when he spoke, it sounded like words were coming out of his mouth. Again, we've come a long way in those. The original ones that I first trained on sounded very like a buzz, and it was very hard to understand. You really needed to take several weeks working with these patients if you had never worked with them before in trying to understand what it was they were saying. And we used to take the devices home and practice with them so we could understand what they were saying. Now,
just so that you would get used to the sound.
So I would get used, so the person listening to them would get used to the sound.
So a lot of luck that some stranger at a party would have understanding.
Right, or talking over the phone was also very difficult. Now they've come, again, they've developed these a lot better, and the vibrator, essentially, that it is, has gotten a lot better, and they sound a lot better, and they're more easy to understand. They also have other ways for laryngectomies, as these patients are called, to communicate. They can communicate through learning esophageal speech, which is something a speech pathologist would teach, which is essentially it's more than burping on this burping up air to make the sound. But
the esophagus is part of the digestive tract, actually, right?
No, the esophagus is part of the respiratory.
It's part of the respiratory. What's the trachea? That's in your.
I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. The esophagus is part of. I'm sorry. The esophagus is part of the digestive tract.
Yeah.
The trachea is part of the respiratory tract.
Yeah. No, you were right. I was wrong. You were right. I've got you confused.
Yeah. It's easy to do.
Isham Martin on the WINY talk show. We're talking with Jennifer Berman this morning. It's Monday, and we're all having a little bit of trouble. But she's happy to take your calls if you have any questions about speech pathology or help that you or maybe a family member or a friend or neighbor may need, or maybe you've got a story about speech pathology. Maybe you were involved in some of these earlier modalities that we're talking about and would like to tell us a story. The number here is 928-2721. 928-2721 at the talk show. The number, if you're calling from Plainfield, is 774-5161. What is your arrangement with the hospital and the way you're, functioning professionally here in northeastern Connecticut?
Right now, I'm in private consultation to the hospital. I work for them on an as-needed basis, and the doctors refer to me. I need a doctor's referral before I can practice or before I can treat a patient. And as needed, we offer therapy. If you're an inpatient, we offer daily 5-day-a-week therapy. If you're an outpatient, we offer usually 2 to 3 time a week therapy.
Okay, so the inpatients, would this be people that have just had surgery or just had a stroke or something,
yes,
and that are in the hospital?
Yes, they're usually several days post-onset. Sometimes we get them immediately. They've come into the hospital the night before, and the doctor sends us an order. But
people don't stay too long in the hospital today, do
about
they?
7
usually?
days is the average course of stay.
Uh-huh.
And then, we see them, evaluate them, get them started in speech therapy or whatever type of therapy they needed, and then we refer them either to a rehabilitation hospital if that's appropriate for them, or we may refer them to a nursing home where they can get further rehabilitation, or if they're going home, we often have them come back for outpatient therapy.
In terms of speech help, are there some things that these nursing homes or rehab hospitals can do in the area of speech that are different or better than what you're able to do?
Probably not any different or better, or at least I hope not. Some of the rehabilitation hospitals are a little more advanced in the communication devices than I am, just because I'm one person and I'm treating all 68,000 people in the community, and they tend to have more resources and things available to them. But they wouldn't get any better treatment, I hope.
How does the population that you're seeing through referrals from local physicians break down in terms of age and pathologies?
Mostly at this time I'm seeing adults. The children are mostly treated through the school systems. Although I am seeing one child now, but mostly I'm treating adults, treating strokes, which is a large part of my caseload at this point. I'm treating some neurological patients with disorders such as Parkinson's disease. I'm treating, I've had one stuttering case recently, and I'm treating a number of patients, or evaluating a number of patients who have various types of dementia, and setting up programs for them and their families to work on at home. And
tell us what dementia is. I think that I'd know, but
okay. Dementia is a general term meaning usually a brain disease resulting in loss of function as an adult. They gradually lose their memory, lose their ability to orient themselves to who they are, who the people around them are, where they are, what day of the week it is, those types of things. And what I do is...
Does Alzheimer's fall under
Alzheimer's
this
is
category?
a type of dementia.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's a general term meaning a general progressive brain disease.
Yeah, one, I can't remember, I'm not going to get anybody in trouble because I'm not going to remember who it was that said this, but one family friend's child knew that grandma or somebody had Alzheimer's disease and called it old-timers disease.
That's a frequent...
It's a frequent, common mistake. Huh?
Common mistake, and we used to hear, I'm from Philadelphia most recently, we used to hear certain people from Philadelphia call it old-timers disease, thinking that was what it is, because you usually get it when you're old.
Yeah.
And they call it old-timers disease.
Yeah. So not a terrible mistake.
No.
Okay. So you're seeing mostly older people who have had a lot with strokes and with neurological disorders like Parkinson's disease. I would think that the loss of function, such as speech, with older people, that there could be an attendant loss of self-esteem when people begin to have problems with speech and communicating, and that could really aggravate and end up being one of the real negative things about having had the stroke. If they begin to have trouble communicating, or they're embarrassed because of the way they appear or sound to old friends and family members.
That's definitely one of the hardest areas for people to lose is their ability to communicate, because communication is so important in our lives. So one of the things that we work on, we work as counselors essentially on finding a way for this person to communicate as best they can, be it through speech, be it through some other communication, other way to communicate, pointing to pictures, learning signs, or whatever that might be. And we also work on their self-esteem and telling them that, well, yes, you have a problem communicating, but these are the things you can do, and let's work on your strengths. We're going to work on your communication, but let's work on your other strengths too. What do you have that's positive, that's going for you? Family support is really important with these patients, and we encourage them to get out in the community and communicate with people as much as they can, and as much as they feel comfortable. And most people, after a while, will begin to adapt and begin to realize we do get a lot of post-stroke what we call post-stroke depression, and we often refer these people for further emotional counseling, either through the mental health clinic or some other clinic such as that. And in other places that I've worked in, we've had post-stroke support groups for people who have problems communicating, and working on just their feelings and what's it like to not be able to communicate to your spouse even, or to your children, or even to your speech therapist. And most speech therapists are really empathic and good at understanding, good at guessing what the person wants and what the person's trying to say. But there are times when even we look at the patient and say, I know you're trying to tell me something, and I know this is frustrating for you, but let's
get it
drop
out.
It.
For God's sakes, get it out.
Sometimes you want to say that, but we try not to.
What physically has happened to somebody that's had a stroke?
Physically, a stroke is a problem with the blood flow in the brain, and physically they can be left with a lot of impairments. As far as speech is concerned, they can sometimes have what's called dysarthria, which is a problem controlling the speech mechanism, so that they know what they want to say, but the words come out slurred, or they come out so that they're not understandable. And another problem that we often see is called aphasia, where the person either can't think of the word they want to say, they can't understand what's being said to them, or they can't understand what they want to say. They can't express themselves and say what they want to say. So there's a number of different disorders. Sometimes we see patients after a stroke who have what's called apraxia. And apraxia is problems making voluntary. They know they want to push the elevator button, or they know they want to say something, but if nobody interrupts them, they can say it. They can say happy birthday to their mother. But if somebody says, go say happy birthday to grandma, all of a sudden they can't do it because somebody's asked them to. So those are some problems.
We know about all of these different problems because I think Victor Cifuentes on LA Law has defended just about everybody in some kind of a civil case where they've lost their job or something because of one of these things.
Right.
Probably. So that's where we get most of our knowledge about medical things today. Tourette's syndrome. Tourette's syndrome, of course, is the most entertaining of these disorders for television programs.
Tourette's syndrome is very interesting. It's not a disease I've worked with. It's not a disorder I've
would
really
it come
worked
Would
with.
it come under your field at all?
I do know some people who work with some Tourette's syndrome people, but mostly it's under the field of psychiatry, and generally if these patients take their medication, they don't have these bizarre tick-like behaviors and these barking sounds that come forth. And usually it's not something they can control anyway, so if they can't control it, it's real hard for us to work with it. But I do know some people who do research into Tourette's and things like that, mostly why they have this problem.
Yeah. You can get that twitching just from being in radio for a while, also.
You can get that twitching from about anything.
Yeah.
I've twitched, and I'm a mother.
And sometimes we say inappropriate things, you know, when we shouldn't also. Okay, Isham Martin on the talk show. We're talking with Jennifer Berman about speech pathology and her work as a consultant to Day Kimball Hospital. She works mostly with adult patients, with people that have had strokes and that are having different neurological problems like Parkinson's disease that have affected their speech. Stuttering. You referred to it as stuttering. In my notes this morning, I wrote down stammering. Is there a difference between stuttering and stammering?
Only in England. In England, it's called stammering, and in the United States, it's called stuttering. Why the difference? Technically, in my field, we call it disfluency, to just add another jargon name.
There you go again.
It means nothing, but we call it fluency or disfluency, and disfluency is stuttering.
Now, when I was growing up, we always said that it was some kind of overbearing mother or something that caused this stuttering.
That's a psychiatric...
Do your kids stutter, by the way?
My kids don't stutter, but hopefully I'm not an overbearing mother. Really, stuttering is not caused by an overbearing mother.
Also, asthma is also caused by overbearing mother.
That may be true. I don't know that much about asthma. But stuttering's really not caused by an overbearing mother. They're doing more studies in stuttering, and they're finding that it's probably a neurologic problem, something congenital that developed in the womb, and that it's probably neurologic in basis anyway. And they've, I think, recently found this out in the last probably 5 or 10 years. They've been suspicious of it, and they've recently discovered it, and hopefully someday maybe we'll know where in the brain it occurs. There are definitely things that people can do to encourage, if your child stutters, to encourage him to stutter, such as putting a lot of pressure on him.
I know what I do. I'm just telling them, just cut it right out.
That's right. That's right. But there are also things you can do if you have a child who stutters to try and help him through stuttering, such as telling him to just, take a breath, or if the child is really wound up. And all children naturally go through a period of stuttering. Their brain is thinking faster than their mouth is talking, and they want to get something out, and they say, I do, I do, I do, I do, and they just are saying it forever, and you want to stand there and, just choke them or something. But usually with these children, if you say, I know you really want to tell me something, but you seem like you're overexcited right now, or you seem like it's just hard for you, let's do something else, and you can tell me in a couple of minutes what it is you want to say. And when they calm down, a lot of these children will be able to tell you fluently what they want to say.
Well, do you remember the country and western singer, a man?
I know who you're talking about, and I can't remember his name.
I remember the year he won. He was the Country Music Entertainer of the Year, and maybe somebody will phone in and tell us. And he stammered terribly when he spoke, but he never would stammer when he sang.
That's common.
And is that because you're relaxed about the singing, because you're in a different mood, or because you've memorized what it is, the words in the song?
Memory doesn't usually help. Usually what it is singing comes from a different area of the brain than speaking does. And we find that many of our stutterers don't stutter when they sing, or don't stutter when they're talking to their children. They have areas where they don't stutter, and it's really great. And we try and work to those strengths. I just treated someone recently who doesn't stutter with her children. She stutters everywhere else, but she doesn't stutter with her children. Some of it may be due to the fact that they're feeling more relaxed in certain situations than in others. If you're feeling tense, you're going to stutter more.
Yeah. Shirley, we got any Indian Ranch tickets or anything like that we could give away to anybody that phones in and who remembers who the country and western singer is that stammered?
I'm trying. I can picture his face, and I just can't remember who he is.
He was a slender, nice-looking, middle-aged man. He stammered when he talked, but not when he sang, which he probably would not have had such a great career if he stammered when he sang. We have no giveaways for the first caller with that information. Here's another phone call. Maybe this is it. Who? Somebody give us a call. Who was the country and western singer that stammered when he spoke, but not when he sang. Nice guy, too. Saw him on Johnny Carson. Come on, Cheryl. Anyway, children. We were talking about little kids before, and we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about children and what the modern parents can do just as a preventative kind of thing. We got a phone call. Let's take the phone call. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
You're talking about Mel Tillis.
Mel Tillis.
That's what it is.
All
I
right.
wanted to say Mel Torme, and I knew
my
that wasn't
boyfriend.
it.
My favorite.
You like Mel Tillis?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he's nice.
Very good.
He's a nice guy. I'm sorry we have no prizes.
That's all right.
But it's its own, just having the information is
I just thought I'd
its
help
own
you out.
reward. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Mel Tillis. Listening to the WINY country music fans. Isham Martin on the talk show with Jennifer Berman. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what parents can do to just help with the speech and language development of their little ones, even preschoolers, to avoid problems later on. We'll be right back.
This is...
We're back, Isham Martin with Jennifer Berman, talking about speech. At what age should parents start to be paying attention to what little ones are doing as far as making sounds and articulating in one way or another?
I encourage from the time children are born to start paying attention to how they're responding to sounds, what they respond to. I remember when my daughter was first born, I'd have her in a little snuggle sack in front of me, and I'd be walking all over the place with her, and we'd go grocery shopping or whatever, and she'd be in the little snuggly with me, and I'd be talking to her about what I was doing, where we were going, and that sort of thing. And people, I'm sure, stared at me oddly, because here's this, mother talking to this baby who's, a few days old, and thinking, what is this? What is this woman doing? But it's very important to talk to
I know what they were
children.
thinking. These were the older parents that were thinking, oh, this mother's probably is her first child, and she's paying way too much attention to this kid, and this kid is going to give you a lot of trouble down the road by being overindulged.
No.
How's she doing so far?
She's doing really well, and I'd like to say that her speech is quite good, and so is her language. Yeah, she's almost 3 years old, and she said precipitously to us the other day, and she tried to use it in a sentence. She must have heard my husband or myself say it sometime during dinner, and all of a sudden she tried to say precipitously, and I just looked at her, and it took me about 5 minutes to figure out what she was saying.
She didn't get that off Sesame Street, I can tell you.
She didn't get that one off Sesame Street.
No. Something happened precipitously.
Something.
Or was going to. Okay. So from when they're tiny, you pay attention to how they're responding to what you're saying and to noises and everything. How about just from an exercise point of view in terms of...
Well, really, you don't need to do any particular exercises with a child.
You don't have to manipulate their face or anything.
Children pick up speech as long as there's no problem, as long as they're not hearing impaired or something like that. They pick up speech, if you're talking to them, they pick it up naturally. And that's why I'm a big advocate of talking to your child and just telling them what you're doing. Mommy's vacuuming the living room now. Hear the sound of the vacuum. Or there's the doorbell, or there's the phone ringing. Hear the sound of the phone. And they pick up sounds and they pick up speech naturally from the people around them. Usually we start seeing speech sounds developing around the age of 2. They start developing certain speech sounds. They should have sounds like M.
Walk at 1, talk at 2.
Well, talk at 2. They should be saying their first word at 1 year. And then at 2 years, they should be saying 2 words. And then it develops on from there. It doesn't go linearly. At 3 words, they shouldn't be saying 3 words. But at 3 years, they probably are talking in at least 3 to 4 word sentences. At the age of 2, they should have certain sounds developed, such as M, P, H, in their vocabulary or in their articulation. And there are charts that speech pathologists use to look at if a parent thinks their child is having a speech or articulation problem. They'll give the child an articulation test, and they'll look at what sounds the child has, how old the child is this normal for this child's age. But talking to a child is the best way. Talking, reading, singing, playing games are some of the best ways to help develop good speech and language in a child.
I remember with my children when they were real little that some of the boys would just start running their mouth as soon as they were able to,
Sure.
stream of consciousness, whatever comes into their head. As soon as they could say any words, they were talking. And others, maybe almost as out of pridefulness or something, didn't have a lot to say until they were, which seems so funny out of tiny people, for the personality to already seem to have an effect on their speech. Didn't really want to talk very much until they were sure they could talk nicely.
Right.
Is that possible?
That's possible.
Yeah.
Sure. It's like
they pretty much started talking in whole sentences. They just sort of remember one son in particular who was just taking everything in and watching what other people were saying and listening, and then just sort of started talking.
Personality does play a role. Some kids are very talkative. Other kids just sit back and don't say too much until they're ready. And it kind of reminds me of the old joke of the kid who hasn't said anything for 5 years to his parents. His parents are getting very worried. Why hasn't he talked? And all of a sudden he says to his mother one morning, "My pancakes are cold." And she says, "My God, Johnny, you talked." And he said, "Well, up until then, everything's been fine." So, it really depends. Some of it depends on the personality. But really, if your child isn't cooing and gurgling and babbling by about 4 to 6 months, you might want to start really listening and playing sounds for them. Do they respond to a sound? Because they might have a hearing impairment.
Jennifer Berman telling jokes on the talk show. Not many of our guests tell jokes.
Oh, well, I'm not a stand-up comic, so...
Well, you're doing very well, and we're having a nice talk, Jennifer and me. Is that right, Jennifer and me? I pronounced it right. Jennifer and I are having a nice talk, but and she's willing to take your calls and answer your questions on the talk show. The number is 928-2721, and we'll do some of that when we come right back from Bob Harris's weather forecast, brought to you today by Safeway Petroleum.
Morning, everybody. We're going to have a mixed...
It's 75 degrees in Putnam by the Cargill Falls. Isham Martin with my guest Jennifer Berman, who is a speech-language pathologist in private practice and working as a consultant at Kimball Hospital. She sees people in the hospital in an office there, as well as inpatients, people who have had strokes and surgery. And she works with young people, middle-aged people, old people. We invite your telephone calls. Give us a call at 928-2721 if you have any questions about speech. Being able to speak well depends to a great extent on hearing. Better put your microphone on. Okay. You might want to tell another joke. Do a lot of with a lot of the children that you see, are you getting referrals because they have hearing problems that are affecting their speech, and what kind of hearing problems are they having?
We often get children who have hearing problems, and they have what's called either otitis media or chronic otitis media, which means they're getting middle ear fluid or middle ear infections in their ears, and therefore the fluid in their ears is impairing their hearing. And of course, if you can't hear somebody speak, you can't speak to them, you can't understand what they're saying, or it may even, if it goes on long enough, it may affect how the child speaks. I have a nephew who is articulation impaired because he can't hear the sounds appropriately and correctly. So the speech therapist that he is seeing is working with him on what the sounds are sounding like and what the sounds are supposed to be. Definitely we do see some of those children.
Some of those problems with kids end when they become older, don't they?
Yeah, they do end a lot of times when they become older. As the child grows, the middle ear changes and you get less infections. Unfortunately, some people don't change. I'm a person who still gets middle ear infections, and I'm 30 years old now. But they do change as they get older. Unfortunately, the problem doesn't change. The problem doesn't go away because the child usually at the age of 6 you have all your speech sounds developed, and you can develop speech sounds after that, but it's much easier before the age of 6 to develop the speech sounds. And also the child by the age of 6 has really learned that what he thinks, maybe a W is really an L, and so he'll just constantly say these words with a W instead of an L, for instance. So it's very hard for these children to hear the correct sound, and it does become hard for them to even hear it. They might not even know that there's an L in the vocabulary if they've never heard it. Just might often, for instance, we can't pronounce certain sounds in the Chinese language, and they can't pronounce in our language. Chinese people have difficulty pronouncing an R because it's not in their language. So
we have a boy from Thailand living with us, and one of his favorite foods is potato chips.
Right.
And he cannot say "cha."
Say the CH sound, and
can't.
it's something that he will not be able to say probably unless he goes to his. We do have accent reduction. You can go to a speech language pathologist and learn to speak more American or speech and learn these sounds. It's not that you can't learn them, but it's more difficult to learn them.
Yeah. What we've tried to do is just teach him a few slang expressions in English that he can say perfectly, so that he can at least create the appearance of being the illusion of speaking English.
That's
it's
right.
working great.
That's good.
Yeah.
And those are things that foreign speakers need to know.
He can say stuff like "it's the best," or "of course" is one of his favorite expressions. Of course. Are the schools doing a good job, the public schools, on picking up the problems of?
That's a difficult question.
Yeah, a little glint came into your eye when I asked that.
You're putting me on.
You're probably going to say some better than others.
Of course, some are better than others. All the school systems are doing the best job that they can. I think. The unfortunate thing about the school systems is that the speech therapists there are usually really overloaded on their caseload, and they try and give as much time as they can to the schools, to the children in the schools, but they have other things that they must be responsible for. They must be responsible for going to pupil placement team meetings and testing all of the kindergartners who come in. And they usually have a lot of kids on their caseloads, and unfortunately, they aren't always able to devote enough time. And they need to make decisions based on their caseload. If this kid is mild, could use speech therapy, but maybe he can go another year. They may put that child off for a year and say, well, we'll rescreen him in a year and see how he's doing. And it's unfortunate that sometimes these decisions have to be made. If there were more money in the school budgets, the schools could hire hopefully more speech therapists and get more of these kids on their caseload. But really, I think about 1/4 of the kids who are seen under the Education for Children, Handicapped Children Act are seen for speech therapy.
Really? Let's take some phone calls. Put your headset on there. Okay, good morning.
Good morning. I am a laryngectomy.
Thank you for calling.
And I do speak esophageal speech.
Yes, I can tell.
And I have to thank speech pathologists, because that's the only way I will learn how to talk again.
Right.
What is this gentleman doing?
Essentially, I'm not sure what method he's using because I can't tell over the phone, but essentially he's using what's called esophageal speech, and we essentially initially teach it as a belch method. They take air in through their mouth into the esophagus, and they essentially belch it out again, and form words, speak as they would speak normally, and you sound like you're quite good at your esophageal speech, and it sometimes takes a number of months before these people become quite proficient.
Was your larynx removed, sir?
Yes, it was.
And how long ago was that?
It was taken away in 1986.
1986.
And I took the speech pathologist. I went to school for it about 9 months.
Yeah, that's usually, we usually tell our patients it'll take 6 to 9 months to really start getting getting good at it, and then we encourage people to continue using it all the time.
I use it all the time.
Great.
Now, because I like to keep my hands free.
Right. Do you have a backup device in artificial
I have
larynx?
2 of them.
You have 2 of them. That's great. We always encourage people to have a backup device in case they get laryngitis or in case they need to speak in a group. Sometimes it's hard to hear esophageal speech in a group, so we always encourage people to have a backup artificial larynx. That's really great. Thanks for calling.
Yeah.
Thank you. You sound great, sir. Thanks for calling us. We appreciate it.
How about that? I give the guy a lot of credit phoning us on the radio. He must have a lot of confidence in it. He's doing really well.
That's really great.
Isham Martin on the talk show with our guest Jennifer Berman talking about speech pathology. We'll be right back. Back with Jennifer Berman, our guest, talking about her work in speech pathology. With the Dempsey Center in Putnam, right next door to Day Kimball Hospital, are you seeing mentally retarded patients on speech issues?
I work a few hours a week at the Dempsey.
Edition of the WINY Talk Show. This is Isham Martin, your host. I'll be with you for the next 51 minutes on an open forum today on the talk show. It's Tuesday, June 4th, 1991, and we have an open forum. We can talk about anything that you've got on your mind. The number here is 928-2721. If you've never called the talk show today, maybe this will be the day. 928-2721. If you're calling from the Plainfield area, the number is 774-5161. We would like to hear from you. The big news today, as it has been on several days in the last weeks and months, is all about the state budget and taxes. The legislature is trying to wrap up their work, all kinds of bills flying out of both chambers of the legislature almost faster than we can keep up with it. Several things of interest. Yesterday, of course, to back up a little bit, both the House and Senate, by margins of about 7 or 8 votes in the last couple of weeks, have voted in favor of a non-income tax budget and taxing plan that is sort of alternative to the governor's proposal for a state income tax. They have done this in the face of the governor vowing to veto whatever plan they passed if it did not include a state income tax. Of course, to set this in even longer-term perspective, this is in the context of the governor during the campaign saying that he was not in favor of a state income tax and that would be like